We established the Courage in Journalism Award at the Legatum Institute to honour Daphne Caruana Galizia and to shine a light on the very real dangers facing journalists around the world in countries like Mexico. We are honoured to have Daphne's son Paul with us today to update us on the significant changes in Malta as a direct result of his mother's death and the real impact of her legacy. Paul, thanks so much for being with us today. Since we started this award 3 years ago, I know that you and your family have been fighting hard to bring about justice for your mother. And in recent months, it seems that things are really starting to change. Can you give us an update on the developments in your mother's case as a result of the work that you've been doing?
Sure, and thank you so much for inviting me and continuing this award. So the funny thing is, had you asked me that question 2 months ago, the answer would have been really different, because in the past 2 months, we had one of the hitmen change his plea to guilty to the first conviction. And we had a series of arrests and criminal charges against people who weren't involved in my mother's murder, but were the subjects of her reporting. So very high-level political figures with a lot of corruption, fraud, were charged over the weekend, 5 years after she reported on them. So the investigation, though, it worked in fits and starts. The 3 hitmen were arrested a month after the murder. And for the year that followed, so the year in which she launched this award, it was really terrible, frankly, because we had no idea what was happening. There was no apparent progress in the murder investigation. And really, as a function of that, my 2 brothers and I kind of traveled around Europe and the world, lobbying politicians, officials, other journalists to take up my mother's case. And then another year after that, we started seeing some progress. So really strong international pressure on Malta to reform in a way that would allow the kind of good and honest police officers, members of the judiciary, to do their work as they're meant to. And then we had more arrests in November 2019. And ever since then, it's just been non-stop, It's really been moving at breakneck speed. We have now criminal proceedings against 3 hitmen, a middleman who was pardoned to 10 states witness, and the man who commissioned them. And as of about 2 months ago now, 2 men who supplied the bomb that was used against my mother. So proceedings against 7 men. 7 men have been charged. One accepted 15 years in exchange for testifying against the rest of them, and the middleman was pardoned completely for the murder in exchange for testimony. So that's where we are. We're some way from a jury trial. So these are all pre-trial proceedings.
Sure. I mean, it's just amazing, and inspiring actually to hear that despite, the hard work, you're seeing real progress. And down to you and your family for raising this awareness. I mean, I've no doubt that seeking this justice is hard fought and relentless on you and your family. What else needs to be done, and what else do you want to see happening in Malta? What's the next step?
So I think I found the last discussion about Mexico really interesting, because as with Malta, the problem wasn't exclusively organized crime. Of course, organized crime flourishes when the state allows it to. In Malta's case, it wasn't, the problem wasn't the proximity of organized crime to the governing class. The problem was that the governing class was inseparable. It was part of this organized crime group. And so for a murder investigation, that causes enormous problems, because you aren't talking about targeting a specific individual who is a criminal or a specific group, which is a crime group. You're talking about dismantling an entire infrastructure that allowed organized crime to develop and really capture the Maltese state in our case. I mean, it was complete capture of key institutions. Our anti-money laundering authority, key parts of the judiciary, key parts of the police force. So from the start, we were in this strange situation. We had our suspicions as to who, as individuals, were behind the murder, but from the start, it was obvious to us that ultimate responsibility was with the Maltese state. And we finally, years and years later, and by the way, this is something my mother always campaigned for, we are starting to see the kind of reform that Malta always needed. In short, the kind of reform that would have made all this impossible. The kind of reform where Malta would have stopped being a place where you carve on people in broad daylight, where you're a conduit for traffic, drugs, and people to the rest of the world. So what we need to see more of is more robust reform. We need to see it moving much faster, and we need to see serious accountability, not just in a criminal justice sense, but in a societal sense. We need to reflect and ask ourselves, how did this happen? How did Malta become a place where something like this can happen? And what are the lessons we can learn for it to never happen again?
Your testimony and experience shows us that whilst change is difficult, real change is possible. And you speak of that being on that journey, I guess. After all that you've been through, what's your reflection and ask of us all and the international community as we seek to champion press freedoms globally?
I think the short answer is that the international response needs to be immediate and robust. And the first thing my brothers and I did is go, for example, to the European Parliament. The lucky, unlucky thing about Malta is that as a small country, in fact, the EU's smallest member state, is that it's very vulnerable to international pressure in a way that, say, Turkey or Russia aren't. So if Brussels starts bearing down on Malta, or Strasbourg, the European Council of Europe rather, starts bearing down on Malta, that has a real effect. So one example in Malta's case is the public inquiry into my mother's assassination, the first public inquiry in Malta's history, which came out of my family's campaigning, which then turned into a motion that the Council of Europe voted on. So it said to Malta, you either convene a public inquiry or will implement some form of sanctions against you. Without that, no public inquiry, no broader accountability. So the summary answer again is a more vigilant international response, a kind of a way of monitoring what's happening before the murder, right? Because the murder is obviously too late. My mother was sued about 70 times before she was killed. By that point, the Council of Europe had started taking an interest in her case. But that was way too late. It was too late. It was so far gone already. And, there must be other cases out there like hers where journalists are being harassed and intimidated and you let that run, it ends in a obvious place. And I wish we had some mechanism that allowed us to monitor that kind of harassment of journalists before it is too late.
Well, and that is why we are here today, to raise awareness and to bring the international community together, to stand with you and to work on behalf of journalists all around the world who are in difficult, hostile environments. So thank you, Paul. We're so grateful for having you here with us today. We continue to support you and your family, as you know, as you seek justice and reform in Malta, and we stand with you as friends in that. So thanks so much for being with us.
No, thank you so much.